Flight attendant denies black woman first-class seat. Moments later, she's fired by the airline's CEO. Have you ever witnessed a single moment that changes everything in an instant, where someone's true character is revealed under pressure, and the fallout is immediate and unforgettable? Today's story follows a black woman who rightfully claims her first-class seat on a flight, only to be denied by a flight attendant who grossly underestimates both her passenger's dignity and her own precarious position. Little did she know, the airline CEO would hear about the incident and deliver a swift, shocking judgment that reverberates far beyond the cabin. Buckle up for a saga of power, prejudice, and a resounding cry for justice that demands to be heard. Rebecca Gilmore had always prided herself on her strict sense of order. The middle child of a family from Sioux Falls, she'd grown up being the responsible one, the one who stood out by following rules to perfection. That inclination led her to a career as a flight attendant with Skybound Airways, a reputable airline that often flew routes through major American hubs like Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. To outsiders, her decision seemed a natural fit. Rebecca was detail-oriented, calm under pressure, and possessed a warm, if somewhat formal smile that put anxious passengers at ease. Yet, hidden beneath that well-groomed exterior and her tidy updo was an inner tension that had been quietly growing over the years. The responsibility that had once empowered her began to morph into an obsession with hierarchy. She viewed the structure of an airplane cabin as a sort of microcosm, first class at the top, economy at the bottom, with the flight attendants as gatekeepers. To her, it was crucial that everything ran according to plan and that no one disrupted her version of order. On a late summer morning, she woke in her cramped Atlanta crash pad to her phone alarm, vibrating incessantly with a digital beep. She had only 4 hours of sleep after a turbulent red-eye the night before. Her uniform hung neatly on the door, pressed and free of wrinkles. Each pin on her lapel name tag, wings and service ribbons was polished to a mirror shine. She glanced at her reflection. The woman she saw was exacting and organized. No room for mistakes. That day, she had a flight from Atlanta to New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport, a route she knew well. The passenger manifest had already pinged her phone. She scrolled through seat assignments. Several first-class seats were vacant, which occasionally meant last-minute upgrades or passengers who might shuffle seats. Normally, such details didn't faze her, but for reasons she couldn't fully explain, her mood that morning was sour. She felt an unspoken agitation simmering inside her, perhaps sparked by exhaustion, perhaps by something deeper. 2 hours later, she arrived at the airport. The hustle of the terminal was intense, even by Atlanta's standards. Lines coiled around security checkpoints, families stood with overstuffed luggage, and business travelers marched straight for the TSA pre-check lanes. Rebecca managed a small, professional nod at a gate agent she recognized, then headed to her assigned gate to prep the aircraft. She double-checked the first-class cabin, ensuring that blankets were folded and pillows were stacked. She fussed with the beverage cart, mentally noting the champagne splits and coffee pods. Everything had to be perfect. As she worked, her colleague and fellow flight attendant, Marsha Collins, joked about the potential for minor chaos on board. "We've got a few travelers on standby," Marsha said. "I hope they're in good spirits if the flight's full." Rebecca nodded with a distant air. "We'll manage." Though she tried to hide it, Marsha could sense Rebecca was tense more than usual. Rebecca's jaw seemed set, her eyes scanning for imperfections. Marsha knew better than to press Rebecca when she got into this mood, so she busied herself in the galley and let her partner work. 30 minutes before boarding, the pilot, Captain Grant Hess, did a brief walk-through of the cabin. He gave a friendly smile and exchanged pleasantries with the attendants. Then he checked his watch and pointed at the runway from a nearby window. "We'll be departing on schedule," he said, voice brimming with confidence. "Better get the passengers boarded soon." "Weather's on our side today." Rebecca double-checked the seat assignments on her handheld device. She noticed a name next to one of the first-class seats, Teresa Nichols. The seat was 2A, a window seat. She told herself it was routine, nothing special about a new name on the list, but the flicker of dissatisfaction in her stomach puzzled her. Why was she so on edge about this seat assignment? She shook her head, brushed off the feeling, and focused on final details. Soon the gate agents opened the walkway, and passengers began to board. As always, first-class passengers were called first. A parade of suits and dresses glided down the aisle. Some wore expensive cologne, others carried the aura of business deals and urgent phone calls. Then came the families and economy travelers, with kids squealing, strollers squeaking, overhead bins filling up fast. Rebecca forced herself to smile, greeting each passenger with the practiced courtesy of a flight attendant. She offered assistance, pointed out overhead compartments, and ushered them to their seats. Everything seemed under control. That sense of order of the cabin's hierarchy had stabilized her mood. What she didn't realize was that in just moments, her fragile sense of control would be shattered, and that Teresa Nichols, the passenger whose name glowed on Rebecca's screen, would be the unwitting catalyst for a clash that would come to define both their lives. That day, inside the sleek confines of an Airbus A321, Rebecca would cross a line. She never imagined crossing, and the consequences would explode beyond anything she could have predicted. Teresa Nichols was headed to New York to start a new chapter of her life. Born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, Teresa had moved to Atlanta to pursue a career in public relations. She quickly built a name for herself, thanks to her relentless dedication and an easy, empathetic manner that drew people in. Her natural warmth had earned her both friends and professional connections in Atlanta. But in recent years, she'd felt the tug of possibility pulling her toward a bigger stage, New York City. After months of searching, Teresa secured a position in Manhattan at a top-tier firm specializing in crisis management and brand marketing. The firm wanted her to start as soon as possible, so Teresa scrambled to arrange her life. She sold her car, ended her lease, and packed what she could into boxes to send north. But for this journey, her final departure, she decided to splurge on a first-class ticket. Her reasoning was simple. She wanted one small moment of luxury before the whirlwind of a new job in an intimidating city. Standing at the check-in counter at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Teresa presented her documents with a beaming smile. The agent confirmed her seat, complimented her on her choice of airline, and tagged her suitcase for priority handling. Teresa felt a ripple of excitement course through her. She was used to cramped economy seats, so sitting in first class felt like a symbol of her advancing career and personal progress. However, beneath that excitement, she felt a pang of anxiety. Teresa was no stranger to incidents of racial bias in everyday life. She'd endured suspicious glances when she browsed upscale boutiques or subtle comments about her articulate way of speaking. Yet she always tried to see the good in people, refusing to let prejudice overshadow her optimism. Still, she knew that traveling as a black woman, even with a first-class ticket, sometimes came with extra scrutiny. As boarding began, Teresa clutched her boarding pass, her pulse quickening with anticipation. She wore a comfortable yet stylish outfit, a tailored navy blazer, matching pants, and a crisp white blouse. With her hair neatly styled, she exuded a poised confidence that turned a few heads. She had worked hard for the life she was living and the seat she had rightfully purchased. When Teresa entered the plane, she was greeted by a flight attendant at the door, Marsha Collins, who offered a bright, genuine smile. "Welcome aboard Skybound Airways." "First class to the left," Marcia said. Teresa nodded in appreciation, scanning the cabin for her seat. Teresa quickly found seat 2A and approached with a pleasant sense of anticipation. She placed her carry-on in the overhead bin, careful not to disturb any other items. Then she settled into the plush seat, which felt worlds apart from the cramped rows behind the curtain. She exhaled, a little bit in awe that she was actually here. Moments later, Marcia approached with a tray of pre-departure beverages. She offered Teresa a choice of orange juice or champagne. Teresa chose orange juice, not wanting to feel tipsy. She took a sip, reveling in the small luxury. The seat felt comfortable, the cabin was serene, and the overhead screens displayed a video montage of scenic destinations. Everything seemed to herald a positive, memorable flight. That's when she first noticed the stern gaze of another flight attendant, Rebecca Gilmore, who stood near the galley. Teresa didn't think too much of it at first. Perhaps the woman was just doing her job, or maybe she was stressed. Teresa offered a friendly smile, though it wasn't returned. Instead, Rebecca looked away, focusing on the checklist in her hands. Teresa tried not to let the chilly reception dampen her excitement. She reminded herself that flight attendants, like anyone else, could have bad days. Taking another sip of her orange juice, she looked around, feeling both gratitude and a tingle of nerves. She stared out the window at the busy tarmac, watching baggage vehicles and fuel trucks scuttle around like mechanical beetles. A quiet sense of hope filled her. She was on the cusp of a new adventure, with a new job, a new city, an entirely new life. She'd chosen to celebrate by traveling first class for the first time in her life, a symbolic statement that she was worth investing in her own comfort and well-being. Little did Teresa know how soon that sense of peace would be disturbed, how quickly a personal achievement she was proud of would be cast into doubt by someone else's ignorance, or how a single confrontation initiated by one person's prejudice would echo beyond the confines of this short flight and into the public spotlight. For now, Teresa focused on the skyline in the distance. The engines hummed faintly beneath the cabin floor. The new life she'd fought so hard for was finally beginning. Despite her optimism, she felt a slight tremor in her chest. Instinct, perhaps, or experience, warning her that discrimination can appear at any time in the line at a grocery store, at a high-end boutique, and even in the first-class cabin of a reputable airline. She steeled herself, hoping she wouldn't need to summon that inner resilience she'd relied on so many times before. With most of the passengers boarded, Rebecca Gilmore walked through the first-class cabin, noting each occupied seat. There was an older couple in seats 1A and 1B, a business traveler typing furiously on a laptop in 2B, and, of course, Teresa Nichols in 2A. Rebecca felt a pang of indignation she couldn't fully articulate. Perhaps she expected someone else in that seat, someone who looked like a corporate executive or a celebrity. Instead, seeing Teresa, a black woman, dressed professionally, yet not as austere as some of the other frequent flyers, triggered something in Rebecca that she could only define as wrongness. Rebecca tried to shake the feeling. She told herself that any paying passenger in first class deserved the seat, no matter who they were. Still, an irrational desire to confirm Teresa's eligibility flared in her. She approached Teresa with a forced smile, holding a tablet in her hand. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Rebecca asked, her tone clipped. Teresa looked up a bit surprised. She maintained her composure, reaching into her blazer pocket for the small slip of paper. "Certainly," she replied, handing it over. Rebecca examined the boarding pass with a keen eye, checking the seat number, the passenger name, and the flight details. Everything matched. She nodded curtly, then gave a robotic thank you before handing it back. Teresa offered a polite smile, but Rebecca's expression remained fixed, almost grim. Turning away, Rebecca busied herself with a final cabin check. Internally, she was waging a silent war with her own prejudices. Why did it matter so much to her who sat in 2A? Why was she fixating on Teresa's presence? She tried to convince herself that she was only verifying seat assignments, following procedure, but a darker part of her mind admitted that her reaction was at least partially driven by unconscious bias, or perhaps prejudice she hadn't confronted in herself. Marcia Collins, meanwhile, noticed the exchange. She and Rebecca had been colleagues long enough for Marcia to sense when something was amiss. After returning a pre-departure tray to the galley, Marcia pulled Rebecca aside. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. Rebecca feigned nonchalance. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" Marcia scanned Rebecca's face. "You seem unsettled." Rebecca bristled. "I'm just doing my job," she insisted, voice tight, "checking seats to make sure passengers are in the correct place." "You know how it is when people try to sneak into first class." Marcia frowned, "but she has her boarding pass. You saw it, right?" "Yes, I did," Rebecca answered, her gaze flicking toward Teresa's seat as if she still needed confirmation. "Look, I'm tired. Let's just do our jobs, okay?" Marcia nodded reluctantly, returning to the main cabin to assist other passengers. Still, her gut told her something was off. She decided to keep a quiet eye on the situation, hoping it wouldn't escalate. A few minutes later, the boarding door was closed and the flight's engines whirred to life. The captain announced a short taxi to the runway. Teresa, in seat 2A, felt a stir of excitement for the journey ahead. She glanced back, noticing the throng of passengers in economy adjusting tray tables and fastening seat belts. She felt a twinge of gratitude that she had more space to stretch and breathe. Rebecca walked down the aisle one last time to ensure seat belts were fastened and electronic devices were switched to airplane mode. When she reached Teresa, she paused. Teresa's seatbelt was already on, and her phone was stowed away. There was nothing to correct or reprimand her for. Yet Rebecca lingered, a faint scowl crossing her face, as if searching for some infraction. Teresa sensed it, though she tried to remain composed. The plane lined up on the runway. The engines roared, and the cabin vibrated as they accelerated into the sky. Teresa stared out the window, watching the ground fall away beneath them. Atlanta's cityscape shrank into a tapestry of roads and buildings. She'd once found it thrilling to watch the city fade, imagining she was leaving her old life behind for a grand adventure. Today, that sense of wonder was tempered by an unease. When the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers in first class relaxed, some ordering drinks and flipping through magazines. Teresa took a moment to breathe deeply, reminding herself she was in a new chapter of her life. This flight was the threshold. Nothing would ruin it, except something was happening in the galley. From seat 2A, Teresa couldn't see everything, but she caught glimpses. Rebecca speaking with an urgent intensity to Marcia, and Marcia shaking her head as if in disagreement. Neither woman looked happy. That tension radiated through the cabin, creating an undercurrent of unease. Teresa closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her nerves. She'd done nothing wrong. She was a legitimate first-class passenger. She told herself that maybe it was all in her head. Perhaps she was just overly sensitive from past experiences. But deep down, Teresa knew something was brewing. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. She just didn't yet know how far it would go, or the devastating consequences it would have not just for her, but for Rebecca, and even for Skybound Airways itself. Mid-flight, the cabin lights dimmed slightly, and a gentle hush settled among the passengers. A few in first class were watching movies on their personal screens. Others were dozing, lulled by the hum of the engines. Teresa was reading an article about the New York public relations scene on her tablet, occasionally jotting down notes for ideas she wanted to explore at her new job. That's when Rebecca decided to strike. She marched down the aisle with an air of manufactured authority. Stopping at seat 2A, she cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she said sharply, causing Teresa to look up with a startled expression. "Yes?" Teresa replied, polite confusion evident in her tone. Rebecca's gaze flickered to the seatbelt sign, which was still off, then back to Teresa's face. "I need to verify that you're in the correct seat," she said. Teresa felt her heart sink. "I already showed you my boarding pass before takeoff," she reminded Rebecca. "And this is my seat." Rebecca frowned. "Sometimes people switch seats with other passengers mid-flight. It's against policy." Teresa's face registered surprise. She hadn't moved a single inch from her assigned seat. Anyone who bothered to look would know that. Still, she tried to remain calm. "I haven't switched seats with anyone. I've been here the whole time." Rebecca folded her arms. "Boarding pass, please." This time, the demand felt more hostile, as if it came from someone determined to prove Teresa was in the wrong. Aware that several nearby passengers were beginning to look on, Teresa tried to steady herself. She retrieved her boarding pass from the pocket of her blazer again, keeping her voice level. "Here it is," she said, handing it over. Rebecca snatched the pass, examined it, then tapped the screen of her handheld device. Teresa glimpsed the device's display, noticing all the seat assignments plainly listed. Her name, Teresa Nichols, was right there in seat 2A. Rebecca's brow furrowed as though the device had betrayed her. Finally, Rebecca pursed her lips and handed back the boarding pass with obvious reluctance. "All right," she said, her voice tight. Without a further word of apology or explanation, she turned and walked back toward the galley. A wave of shock coursed through Teresa. She felt the uncomfortable burn of humiliation creep up her neck. Around her, a few passengers exchanged worried glances. The man in seat 2B offered Teresa a sympathetic shrug, as if to say, "I don't know what's going on either." Teresa's thoughts spun. She had paid for this seat. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. Why was this flight attendant singling her out, demanding her boarding pass multiple times? Was it because she was black? She couldn't dismiss the possibility. She'd experienced enough microaggressions in her life to recognize the signs. Marcia appeared a moment later, offering drinks. She knelt by Teresa's seat, her voice lowered so others wouldn't hear. "I'm so sorry," she said, handing over a small bottle of water. I'm not sure what that was about." Teresa appreciated the gesture, but she felt tears threatening. She nodded politely, choosing not to escalate the situation publicly. But inside, she was angry, hurt, and determined to maintain her dignity. She took a few slow breaths, telling herself to remain calm. She told herself it was one person's prejudice, not the entire airline's. Yet the incident had set a tone. For the rest of the flight, Teresa could sense the tension emanating from Rebecca. The flight attendant avoided eye contact with her, but maintained a near-constant vigilance, as if Teresa might suddenly commit some violation of first-class etiquette. Meanwhile, Marcia tried to overcompensate with kindness, offering snack refills, extra beverages, and repeated apologies. At one point, Teresa excused herself to use the restroom. As she returned, she caught the tail end of a hushed conversation between Rebecca and Marcia in the galley. She heard Rebecca's terse, angry whisper, "She's probably never flown first class in her life. I'm just doing my job by making sure she's where she's supposed to be." Shock flashed across Teresa's face. She could feel her heart pound as she continued to her seat, unseen by the two attendants. Her worst fears were confirmed. This was not just about seat assignments or standard policy. This was about prejudice, plain and simple. She slipped back into seat 2A, her hands trembling. She stared out the window, fighting the sting of tears. A swirl of conflicting emotions churned within her: outrage, disappointment, and a deep sadness that, despite all her hard work and achievements, she could be reduced to a stereotype in the eyes of one bigoted flight attendant. Still, she told herself to hold it together. She had fought too long and too hard for her place in the world to let one person's small-mindedness break her. Besides, the flight would land in a couple of hours, and she would be on her way to a new life in New York. She could report the incident afterward, but fate had different plans. The confrontation would escalate far beyond what Teresa or Rebecca could imagine. And before the flight touched down, alliances would be tested and reputations would hang in the balance, leading to an explosive moment that would change everything. By the time the flight passed the halfway mark, the cabin service was in full swing. Marcia moved gracefully down the aisle, handing out meals to the first-class passengers. Rebecca followed behind, though she appeared visibly on edge. She was making minor mistakes, forgetting a beverage request, stumbling over a passenger's name, and her frustration seemed to build with each slip. Teresa tried to focus on the in-flight entertainment. She put on her headphones, scrolling through the movie selections, willing herself to relax. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she was under surveillance. Every so often, from the corner of her eye, she saw Rebecca glance her way, disapproval etched into her features. Then came the moment when things took a sharp turn. The older couple in seats 1A and 1B had just finished their lunch. Rebecca approached to clear their trays, but tripped on a slight protrusion of the aisle carpet. She lurched forward, the trays rattling. A stray fork clattered to the floor. Although she recovered without falling, embarrassment flashed across her face. In her flustered state, she glanced around, presumably to see who had witnessed her stumble. Her gaze landed on Teresa, who had also seen it happen. Teresa offered a sympathetic smile. It was an awkward moment after all, but Rebecca's eyes narrowed, as if Teresa's reaction was mocking rather than empathetic. Marcia saw the incident and quickly moved forward, whispering, "Are you all right?" to Rebecca. But Rebecca shrugged her off with a brusque nod. The older couple offered a polite, consoling remark, but the flight attendant seemed intent on regaining her composure. Once she had disposed of the trays, Rebecca approached Teresa. Her posture was rigid, tension evident in every line of her body. "Everything okay here?" she asked, voice clipped. Teresa nodded, perplexed. "Yes, everything's fine." Rebecca let her gaze roam over Teresa's seat area, as if hunting for something amiss. "Any problems with the meal or the seat?" "No, no problems," Teresa replied calmly, though she could feel her heart rate rising. Rebecca lingered. Then, in a voice just loud enough for the surrounding passengers to overhear, she announced, "We have other passengers on the wait list for any available upgrades. I need to ensure you have the proper documentation for this seat. There's been an inquiry." Teresa froze, her stomach dropping. "An inquiry?" That sounded ominous and official. "Aye," she stammered, her eyes darting around. The business traveller in 2B paused his laptop activity to listen in. The older couple in 1A and 1B turned slightly, their post-meal lull broken by the disturbance. Marcia, who was serving dessert to another passenger, sensed something wrong. She quickly handed off the dessert tray and came over. "Rebecca, what's going on?" Marcia asked, her voice tinged with concern. Rebecca held her ground. "I've just been informed by the gate that we have a passenger who was supposed to be in 2A, but he missed the flight. I need to confirm that Miss Nichols here was the one who purchased the ticket, or if it was transferred." Teresa blinked, anger flaring behind her eyes. "I purchased my ticket myself, directly through Skybound's website," she said. Her voice trembled with emotion. "Why would you think otherwise?" Rebecca lifted her chin. "Sometimes people book special passes or buddy tickets that don't allow first-class seating." "We have to verify," Marcia cut in, her voice now firm. "Rebecca, I was at the gate before takeoff. Miss Nichols was checked in properly. She has the correct seat assignment. This is not necessary." The tension between the two flight attendants was palpable. Passengers around them began to murmur, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Teresa took a slow, deep breath, trying to maintain composure. "Is there a specific reason you keep questioning me?" "Because this is starting to feel personal." Rebecca's eyes flashed defensively. "I'm only doing my job, ma'am. We have protocols." Marcia shot Teresa an apologetic glance, then turned to Rebecca again. We already verified her boarding pass. Twice. Let's end this. For a moment, Rebecca stood motionless, her cheeks coloring. Then she spun on her heel and stomped toward the front galley without another word. An uneasy silence fell over the cabin. Teresa felt her hands shaking. She closed her eyes, trying to quell the tumult of emotions racing through her. The business traveler beside her leaned over, whispering, "I'm sorry you have to deal with this." Teresa mustered a grateful nod. Meanwhile, Marcia gently patted Teresa's shoulder. "I'll handle this," she said softly. "Please don't let her behavior ruin your flight." In the galley, whispers and muffled words could be heard. It was clear Marcia was confronting Rebecca. Snatches of their conversation floated into the cabin. "You're crossing a line." "I have every right." "No, this is harassment. Stay out of this, Marcia." It was an uncomfortably public spat, and more passengers began to notice. One even pressed the overhead call button, presumably to complain or inquire about the disruption. A sense of shared concern rippled through the first-class cabin, uniting strangers in silent disapproval of what they were witnessing. Teresa swallowed hard, her mind racing. She considered pressing the call button herself, or even demanding to speak to the pilot. But she also felt a weariness settle in the exhaustion of having to defend her legitimacy for something she had every right to possess. The very seat that was supposed to be a small luxury, a reward for her hard work, was turning into a stage for prejudice and humiliation. Somewhere beneath that anger and hurt, a small, determined voice surfaced in Teresa's mind. She wasn't going to let this stand. She would see this through, and then she would hold those responsible to account. If the airline had any integrity, they would act to correct this. And if not, Teresa would take it further. There were ways to be heard in the digital age, ways that could make an entire corporation feel the sting of public outrage. For now, though, she quietly thanked Marcia for her support and tried to refocus on her movie, though it felt impossible to enjoy anything under these circumstances. She noticed the older couple in 1A and 1B whispering and shaking their heads disapprovingly, possibly at Rebecca's behavior. The man in 2B returned to his laptop, but not before giving Teresa an encouraging nod, as if to say he was on her side. Yet Teresa knew the confrontation wasn't over. From the glaring intensity in Rebecca's eyes, there was more to come. The storm of prejudice had only just begun to rage, and all they could do was hold on to their seats until it broke or until someone in authority intervened. Captain Grant Hess adjusted the throttle controls in the cockpit, ensuring the flight was on course. The skies were calm, promising a smooth arrival in New York. Yet he felt an unsettling tension through his earpiece. One of the flight attendants, Marcia, had quietly informed him of a passenger relations issue in first class. She didn't give details yet, but she sounded distressed. Knowing a potential conflict might escalate, the captain told her to keep him updated. He wanted to avoid any situation that might require law enforcement upon landing. Meanwhile, in the first-class galley, Rebecca Gilmore wrestled with her emotions. Part of her knew she was overreacting. She recognized that her irritation was tainted by bias, by an implicit assumption that Teresa Nichols didn't belong in first class. But the larger part of her refused to back down. She told herself she was only upholding airline policy. The problem, she reasoned, was that Marcia kept undermining her authority. Marcia, on the other hand, felt torn between supporting her colleague and standing up for a passenger who was clearly being mistreated. She decided to confer with the lead flight attendant for the entire cabin crew, Paula Smith, who had mostly been monitoring the economy section. Marcia found Paula at the back of the plane, reviewing a log sheet. "Paula," Marcia said softly, "we have a situation up front with Rebecca and a first-class passenger, Miss Nichols. It's turning into harassment. She's singled her out multiple times, accusing her of seat violations and, well, It's clearly not justified. Paula frowned, setting her log aside. Rebecca's typically by the book, but she's not usually like this. Did the passenger do anything to provoke her? Marcia shook her head. Not at all. Nichols has been polite and patient, but she's visibly upset now. And to be honest, this feels racially charged. The passenger is a black woman, and Rebecca seems determined to prove she doesn't belong in first class. Paula's expression hardened. That's unacceptable. I'll have a talk with Rebecca. Marcia released a breath of relief. I'd appreciate that. Together, they made their way to the front galley. Rebecca was there, fiddling with paperwork and glancing toward the cabin as if searching for a reason to pounce. Paula stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Rebecca, a word? Rebecca turned, her expression guarded. Yes, Paula? Paula folded her arms. Marcia tells me there's an issue with a passenger in seat 2A, Miss Nichols. I want your account of what's happening. Rebecca's shoulders stiffened. Miss Nichols is seated in first class, but I have concerns about her ticket. She might be traveling on an ineligible pass, buddy pass, employee discount, or something. I was verifying that she's allowed in that seat. And, Paula prompted. The seat is listed under her name, but we had a no-show for that seat, someone else. I'm just making sure everything is in order. Paula exchanged a glance with Marcia. That's not how seating typically works, Paula said evenly. If Miss Nichols is listed, that means the seat is hers. A no-show has no bearing on this passenger's right to be here. Rebecca faltered. She felt the weight of Paula's gaze. I know, but I had a gut feeling. Paula's tone sharpened. A gut feeling? Rebecca, we do not harass passengers based on gut feelings. We follow the manifest. The manifest says Teresa Nichols is in 2A, correct? Rebecca nodded reluctantly. Paula continued, Then the case is closed. We will not bother her again unless there's a legitimate safety concern. A flush crept up Rebecca's neck. She wanted to retort, but Paula's stern face dissuaded her. Outranked and cornered, Rebecca nodded. Understood, she muttered. Satisfied, Paula turned on her heel and left the galley to check on economy class. Marcia lingered a moment, eyeing Rebecca sympathetically, but also with disappointment. Without a word, she followed Paula. Rebecca stood there, feeling humiliated in front of her colleagues. She attempted to rationalize her actions. She told herself that she was only ensuring the airline's policies were enforced, that her suspicions were justified, but deep down she knew none of it was sitting right. She resented that Marcia had taken the matter over her head, and she felt betrayed. In the first-class cabin, Teresa finally allowed herself a moment of relief. She saw Paula and Marcia emerge from the galley and move on, presumably concluding their discussion with Rebecca. The tension still hung in the air, but at least the immediate threat of confrontation seemed to have passed. Still, the psychological toll was high. Teresa's heart pounded, and she fought a swirl of emotions, anger, embarrassment, sadness. She wondered if she should say something to Paula or even the captain. She considered filing a complaint as soon as they landed. A fleeting thought crossed her mind, capturing the aftermath on video. But she hesitated, not wanting to cause more disruption among the passengers. She also knew that once the flight was over, she could handle the matter through the airline's official channels or even social media, if necessary. Yet as the flight neared the final hour, an unexpected event would push the conflict to a boiling point. Rebecca's anger at being reprimanded by Paula, her sense of betrayal by Marcia, and her unresolved prejudice against Teresa were all about to explode in a single, shocking confrontation, one that would be witnessed by dozens of passengers and, very soon, by the entire world online. Somewhere ahead, the city lights of New York began to glow on the horizon. Inside the plane, emotions flared like sparks in a dry forest, waiting for the smallest gust of wind to erupt into a blaze. The question was no longer if a confrontation would happen, but how destructive it would be when it finally did. 30 minutes before landing, the captain announced their initial descent into John F. Kennedy International Airport. The cabin lights brightened slightly as flight attendants prepared for final service. Rebecca Gilmore stood in the galley, her pulse racing. She hadn't forgiven or forgotten the reprimand from Paula. In her mind, Marcia had undermined her, Teresa had humiliated her, and Paula had scolded her like a novice. Her sense of order, of authority, felt torn apart. During final checks, she noticed that Teresa Nichols had placed her laptop bag quite small on the floor at her feet. Rebecca decided it was an infraction worthy of addressing. Airline regulations required carry-on items be stored securely, but typically a small laptop bag could remain under the seat in front or at the passenger's feet if it was well stowed. Still, any excuse would do. She marched to seat 2A, her face set. Teresa, who had been tidying her things in preparation for landing, looked up. "Ma'am, I need that bag out of the aisle," Rebecca said, her voice bristling with authority. Teresa glanced at the slim laptop case, which was neatly tucked under her own feet, not protruding into the aisle at all. "It's not in the aisle," she said, keeping her tone calm. "It's under my feet, as instructed." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "It needs to be fully beneath the seat in front of you. Please comply immediately." Teresa inhaled slowly, moving the bag an inch forward, though it was already secure. "Is this acceptable?" she asked. Rebecca assessed it. Despite the bag being in compliance, she shook her head. "No. It needs to be in the overhead bin for landing." Now, Teresa felt her frustration mount. She looked around, noticing the overhead bins were mostly full. And more importantly, there was no regulation requiring a small laptop bag to be stowed overhead if it fit properly under the seat. "I believe it's standard policy to stow it under the seat, which I've done," Teresa asserted. Rebecca's face reddened. She leaned in, voice lowered but angry. "Are you refusing to follow a flight attendant's instruction?" A hush fell over the first-class cabin as passengers realized something was happening again. Marcia, sensing the commotion, hurried over. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to diffuse the tension. "She's refusing to stow her bag properly," Rebecca snapped. Marcia looked down at the small laptop bag. It was clearly tucked away safely. She blinked, then turned to Rebecca. "That looks acceptable to me," she said quietly. Rebecca seemed to vibrate with anger. She turned to Teresa. "Place your bag in the overhead, or I'll have you removed from the flight upon landing." That was the tipping point. Teresa bristled, her own anger finally boiling over. "Excuse me," she said, her voice shaking. "You're threatening to have me removed when I've done nothing wrong?" The business traveller in 2B interjected, "Ma'am, the bag is clearly not in the aisle." "Why are you?" Rebecca cut him off. "Sir, stay out of this." Marcia placed a hand on Rebecca's arm. "Rebecca, calm down. This is inappropriate." But Rebecca shrugged off Marcia's hand. She reached for the phone attached to the galley wall, presumably to speak to the captain or request ground authorities. In a split-second decision, Teresa stood up, her voice resolute. "I've complied with every policy. I'm tired of this harassment. If you're going to call the captain, I'll speak to him too." As if summoned, Paula Smith entered the first-class section, alarmed by the raised voices. She immediately sized up the situation, Rebecca trembling with rage and phone in hand, Teresa standing with her laptop bag, and a crowd of passengers watching anxiously. "Rebecca, hang up the phone," Paula demanded. "That's an order." Rebecca hesitated, then slowly replaced the receiver. She glared at Paula. "She's creating a disturbance," Rebecca insisted. Paula's eyes flashed. "The only disturbance I see is this confrontation. Miss Nichols's bag is stowed properly. There was no need for this escalation." Teresa stood her ground, every muscle tensed. She spoke directly to Paula. "I've been harassed this entire flight made to show my boarding pass multiple times, singled out. I've had enough. Before Paula could respond, the captain's voice came on the intercom, instructing the cabin to prepare for landing and for flight attendants to take their seats. Paula turned to Rebecca one final time. We will handle this after we land, with the captain's oversight. Until then, no more. Understood? Rebecca's jaw tightened. She gave a curt nod, then turned and stomped off to strap herself into her jump seat for landing. Paula and Marcia exchanged concerned glances. They guided Teresa back to her seat, where she stowed her bag once more, ensuring no possible justification for further conflict. Silence gripped the cabin as the plane descended. Outside, the New York skyline came into view. Inside, hearts pounded. Teresa blinked back tears of frustration. She'd never felt so humiliated. Across the aisle, the business traveler offered a small, supportive smile. In seat 1A, the older couple whispered to each other in obvious disapproval of what they'd witnessed. The wheels touched down with a jolt, and the engines roared as the plane slowed. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Teresa wondered what would happen next. Would the airline stand by their flight attendant, or would they recognize the injustice that had taken place? As the aircraft taxied to the gate, the captain made the standard arrival announcement. But behind the veneer of routine, a storm was brewing, one that would soon reach the ears of the very top executive at Skybound Airways, a CEO with little tolerance for scandal or racism. Beneath Teresa's calm exterior lay a mountain of resolve. She vowed silently, "This will not go unnoticed. This will not go unpunished." And in the next few minutes, the seeds of that vow would take root in a confrontation that would shape the headlines far beyond the corridors of JFK Airport. The plane rolled to a halt at the gate. The seatbelt sign clicked off. Teresa Nichols felt her stomach churn with anxiety, but she pressed forward. She stood to collect her carry-on from the overhead bin, mindful of the watchful eyes around her. The moment the main cabin door opened, Paula Smith instructed passengers to disembark as usual, starting with first class. Teresa hesitated, expecting to be detained by security or confronted by airline staff. Instead, Paula touched her shoulder gently. "Miss Nichols, if you wouldn't mind staying a moment, the captain wants to speak with you and sort this out. We'd like you to be present for that conversation." Rebecca, strapped in at her jump seat until the passengers finished deplaning, glowered at Teresa but said nothing. Marcia gave Teresa a small nod of encouragement as she aided other passengers exiting the plane. Within minutes, the first-class cabin emptied. Paula guided Teresa to the galley, where Captain Grant Hess waited, his expression serious. He was a tall, middle-aged man with steely eyes that radiated authority. "Miss Nichols, the first apologize for any discomfort you experienced," he said gravely. "I'd like to understand what happened from your perspective." Teresa recounted each incident, being asked repeatedly for her boarding pass, the insinuations that she didn't belong in first class, and ultimately being threatened with removal over a minor issue with her bag. Her voice trembled at points, but she maintained composure. Captain Hess listened intently, then turned to Paula. "And from your observation?" he asked. Paula nodded. "I saw repeated confrontations that seemed unnecessary and targeted. Miss Nichols hadn't broken any policies that I witnessed." Rebecca escalated the situation beyond reason. The captain's lips pressed into a thin line. He looked at Teresa. "On behalf of Skybound Airways, please accept my apologies. This is certainly not how we want any passenger, especially a paying first-class passenger, to be treated." Just then, Rebecca stepped forward, having been released from her jump seat. Her face was flushed with anger and perhaps fear. "I was following protocol," she insisted, her voice trembling. "I believed Miss Nichols was an unauthorized upgrade. I was trying to keep the cabin in order." The captain fixed her with a stern gaze. "Rebecca, the manifest shows Miss Nichols was properly ticketed. You verified her boarding pass multiple times. Paula and Marcia confirm she was in compliance. Why did you continue to confront her? Rebecca opened her mouth, but no sound came out initially. Finally, she snapped, I don't have to defend my actions to you. I know what I saw. Captain Hess's eyes narrowed. You do have to defend them, because this is now a serious matter. The passenger was threatened with removal for no valid reason. That could be considered harassment or worse. This is unacceptable. Before Rebecca could retort, another voice joined them, a calm baritone that commanded immediate attention. Captain Hess, mind if I join you? Everyone turned to see a tall, distinguished-looking man in an impeccable suit. Paula's eyes widened in recognition. It was Skybound Airways CEO, Martin Rothschild, who happened to be in transit at JFK that day for a corporate meeting. He'd been informed of a disturbance on one of his company's flights and decided to investigate personally. Mr. Rothschild, Captain Hess said, clearly taken aback. I wasn't aware you were here. I was in the lounge when news came that we had an incident involving possible discrimination. The CEO explained, voice calm, but with an undercurrent of stern resolve. I'd like to understand the situation firsthand. He introduced himself to Teresa, shaking her hand respectfully. Miss Nichols, I'm truly sorry for what you've endured. Please share your account with me. Teresa repeated her story, how she had been singled out, harassed and humiliated. As she spoke, tears pooled in her eyes. She blinked them back, determined to maintain her dignity. Martin Rothschild listened closely, his brow furrowing deeper with each detail. When she finished, he turned to Rebecca, his gaze unwavering. Miss Gilmore, do you have anything to add or to refute? Rebecca stood rigid. In a last-ditch effort, she stammered, It wasn't personal. I was enforcing policies and trying to prevent seat theft. There was a no-show for this seat, so I thought, Martin Rothschild didn't let her finish. No show or not, Miss Nichols was confirmed for 2A. That fact negates your entire justification. I also understand from Captain Hess and Miss Smith that you threatened her with removal over a minor bag placement that was already compliant. Is that accurate? Rebecca's cheeks flamed red. She realized she had no logical defense. Yes, I asked her to put it in the overhead. That was unwarranted, Rothschild stated, cutting in. And you threatened removal. That's a serious abuse of authority. Silence fell. Captain Hess exchanged a meaningful look with Paula. Marcia, standing at a slight distance, watched with relief. Teresa stood quietly, heart pounding, unsure if she should say more. Finally, Martin Rothschild faced Teresa. Miss Nichols, again, on behalf of Skybound Airways, I extend my deepest apologies. What you experienced does not reflect our values. I assure you we will address this immediately. Then he turned to Rebecca. Miss Gilmore, I'm placing you on immediate suspension. Pending an investigation, it's likely you'll be relieved of your duties. You are not to operate any further flights for Skybound Airways until this matter is resolved. A collective stillness gripped the group. Rebecca's eyes went wide. Her mouth quivered as she tried to form words. You can't just fire me. Rothschild remained calm. I can and I will. If the investigation confirms these allegations of racial harassment, we have zero tolerance for discrimination. Rebecca's expression flickered from anger to panic. Before she could argue further, security personnel arrived, having been signaled by the CEO's staff. 2 uniformed officers stepped in, politely but firmly guiding her away. As they escorted Rebecca out of the jetway, her voice rose in protest. I didn't do anything wrong, she's lying. But the evidence was stacked against her witnesses. The flight manifest and the victim's account all told a consistent story. Teresa felt a flood of emotions, relief, vindication, and an odd sadness for the flight attendant who had let bias consume her judgment. Martin Rothschild turned to Teresa with a compassionate smile. "Miss Nichols, we would like to offer you a formal apology and full reimbursement for your ticket, along with travel vouchers and an upgrade on a future flight. I hope you will accept our efforts to make amends." Teresa nodded, her voice shaky. "Thank you. I appreciate that." Nearby passengers who had lingered outside the aircraft or in the hallway caught snippets of the confrontation. Some recorded it on their smartphones. It was only a matter of time before the story hit social media, shining an unflattering light on both Rebecca Gilmore and Skybound Airways. But the airline's swift, high-level response would resonate just as strongly. The CEO himself had shown up in person, taken immediate action, and offered a sincere apology. In an era of viral videos and public backlash, that proactive stance could very well protect the airline's reputation, even as it put an abrupt end to Rebecca's career. Teresa felt a rush of gratitude toward Paula, Marcia, and Captain Hess for standing up for what was right. At last, the ordeal was over, and she could continue her journey to her new life in New York, unburdened by the injustice she had suffered at 30,000 feet. 2 days after the flight, news of the incident spread across social media and various news outlets. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation posted their stories. Some had videos capturing Rebecca's confrontations with Teresa in the first-class cabin. They also recorded the moment CEO Martin Rothschild arrived and addressed the matter swiftly. Headlines such as Skybound Airways CEO fires flight attendant for harassing black passenger and first-class discrimination leads to immediate termination circulated widely. In Charlotte, where Teresa had grown up, her friends and extended family saw the story. They were appalled at what she'd gone through, but proud of her poise under pressure. Colleagues from Atlanta sent messages of support, expressing outrage and solidarity. Teresa thanked them, explaining that she intended to focus on her new job rather than dwell on the negative experience. Still, she felt compelled to give a brief statement online, acknowledging the support and emphasizing the need for continued awareness of racial bias in everyday situations. As for Skybound Airways, Martin Rothschild released a formal statement within 24 hours, apologizing to Teresa Nichols and confirming that the flight attendant involved had been terminated following an expedited investigation. The statement praised the other flight attendants and the captain for upholding the company's values of safety and respect. Rothschild vowed to conduct additional diversity and sensitivity training for employees, ensuring this kind of incident wouldn't repeat. Behind closed doors, Rebecca Gilmore found herself abruptly cut off from a career she'd nurtured for over a decade. With the termination on her record, she found it difficult to secure a new position in any reputable airline. Her name became linked to a viral scandal, a cautionary tale about letting personal biases override professional conduct. In the weeks that followed, Rebecca's personal life took a downward turn. The bills stacked up and job prospects dwindled. She began receiving hateful messages online once her identity was leaked. Desperate and frightened, she attempted to defend herself in a poorly timed interview with a tabloid news show. Her defensive words only fueled public scorn. The tabloids framed her as a prime example of prejudice in customer-facing industries, leading to even more backlash. Meanwhile, Teresa focused on her new position in Manhattan. The PR firm she joined specialized in crisis management, and ironically, her own experience on the flight became a talking point in the industry. Several of her new colleagues admired her poise and resilience, seeing those qualities as invaluable in high-stakes PR situations. Some even joked that if she could handle such an ordeal, she could navigate any corporate crisis with grace. Teresa appreciated the support, but never forgot the fear and humiliation she felt on that plane. She channeled that energy into her work, championing inclusive messaging for clients and encouraging them to adopt genuine diversity training, not mere lip service. Over time, she found a sense of purpose in transforming her negative experience into positive change. Skybound Airways, for its part, emerged from the scandal with lessons learned. The public largely approved of how swiftly the CEO acted, and many praised the airline's transparency and willingness to take responsibility. To reassure travelers, they extended new training programs, updated their passenger relations protocols, and created an internal hotline for reporting discrimination. Teresa and Martin Rothschild spoke once more via a scheduled call to finalize her compensation and discuss potential speaking opportunities about inclusive travel experiences. Teresa politely declined public engagements, preferring to keep a low profile and focus on her new job. Rothschild thanked her for her grace, reiterating his hope that she would fly skybound again in the future. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Teresa settled into her life in New York, forging new friendships and relationships. She seldom thought about that fateful flight, except when she caught a glimpse of a headline or a viral video snippet from months earlier. Each time, she remembered the jolt of indignation, the flush of shame, and the surge of triumph when justice was finally served. In the end, the flight attendant's bigotry had led to her own downfall. The airline, forced to confront the issue, grew stronger in its commitment to equitable treatment. And Teresa Nichols moved on, her life story continuing far beyond that moment of confrontation in the sky. Yet she knew the moral of it all was clear: no prejudice, however small, goes unnoticed in a world where accountability waits just around the corner and sometimes lands with the force of karmic retribution. This remarkable story reminds us that every action, no matter how small or hidden behind the polite veneer of policy, can have life-altering impact. Teresa Nichols' quiet dignity prevailed over ignorance, and the swift response from Skybound Airways CEO proved that leadership can, when motivated, stand up for what is right. Although the flight attendant's prejudice nearly destroyed a well-earned moment of joy, it ultimately led to her own swift downfall. If you found this story moving, inspiring, or thought-provoking, we'd love your support. Like this video to show that you stand against discrimination in all its forms. Share it with friends and family to spread awareness and spark meaningful conversations. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel so you won't miss future stories of justice, resilience, and the power of standing up for what's right. Thank you for watching, and remember, change begins with each of us.